human beings, PowerGamer here. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but if that's the case, then why did I get an F on the photo of a rat I submitted for my biology report freshman year of high school? I made the minimum word count. Some people just don't appreciate photographing wildlife, whether that be real creatures or pixel ones.
Pokemon Snap, the prime example of just trust me on this, it's fun. Because the premise of taking pictures doesn't sound like an enriching experience, but this is one of the most popular Pokemon spin-offs ever made. Granted, it was also the first, so that might have something to do with it, but yeah, whatever, let's see how it was created. Instead of being developed by Game Freak like the main series games, this one was developed by HAL Laboratory. Yes, the same one that made Kirby, Smash, and Earthbound. This is because it originally had nothing to do with Pokemon, and it was initially titled Jack and the Beanstalk. What this was going to be like, we may never know, as almost all early development traces have never been released. No demos, no clips, no images, nothing. Development began in 1995, but after Pokemon became a smash hit overseas, they decided to convert the game into a Pokemon spin-off. The game was originally going to be compatible with the Nintendo 64 disk drive that was an add-on meant to allow higher quality games, but after that thing tanked, the support was scrapped. Pokemon Snap received high levels of promotion before and after its release, with Nintendo making deals with a lot of high-end stores like Lawson and Blockbuster to promote it, and even offering it to be played in various hotels across America. The game was released on March 21st, 1999 in Japan, July 26th in North America, March 23rd, 2000 in Europe, and September 15th in Australia. It was a pretty big success, with over 1 million copies sold by the end of 1999, and around 3.6 million copies sold overall, making it the 11th best-selling N64 game ever. And it was received fairly well by critics, with many calling it a lot of fun, although it was criticized for its short length. Regardless, the game would develop a large following over the years, mainly by nostalgia-driven kids. No joke, people kept asking for a sequel for years and years with literally every new Nintendo console, until their wish was finally granted with new Pokemon Snap, which was released for the Switch in 2021.
I have played this game before, and I remember enjoying it, but I haven't touched it since then. Was it worthy of all that sequel demand for so many years, or is it just another case of nostalgia bias? Only one way to know.
Pokemon Snap follows a young boy named Todd Snap, although like the mainline games, you can name him whatever you want. Todd is an aspiring photographer who's assisting Professor Oak with his research on Pokemon Island, really knocking it out of the park with these names. Oak asks Todd to take pictures of all the Pokemon on the island so he can see them in their natural habitat and get more info on what they do when they aren't stuffed into tiny metal balls. And that's pretty much it. It's about as simple of a story as Red and Blue, only you're taking pictures instead of battling, and by extension, there's no gyms, evil team, or Pokemon League to deal with. For the first time ever, we can finally see Pokemon in 3D, and it looks about as good as you would think. Obviously, this is the N64, so the textures are very limited, but the model quality is solid for the time, and the animations on all the Pokemon are actually pretty good. The soundtrack is mostly filler, to be honest. I can only remember like 2 or 3 songs in the whole game.
Now, a game where you're taking pictures doesn't sound very exciting, but the gameplay here is a lot more complex than you would think. It's basically an on-rail shooter like House of the Dead or Time Crisis, only instead of gunshots, it's camera shots.
You pick a course which takes you to a different area of the island. Todd is placed inside this machine that automatically moves along a predetermined path, and along the way you have to take pictures of as many Pokemon as possible, although you only have a limited number of shots. Once you reach this gate, you're transported back to the lab. Pokemon are all over the place, and you'll want to get the best photos possible. You first have to enter photo mode by holding down the Z button, which lets you move around this cursor to line up your shot and then snap a pic with the A button. The most exciting shots come from all the various things the Pokemon can do. The Pokemon have predetermined actions, but they can be affected by additional items you receive throughout the game. There's the apples, which you can throw to lure a Pokemon towards a spot or just knock them down, Pester Balls, which explode into a presumably non-toxic gas, though I'm not buying it, and the Pokeflute, which can cause certain Pokemon to do special things when you play it, although there aren't that many.
The most important part of this game is getting high-quality shots, since once you finish a course, your pictures are presented to a pretentious critic, I mean the professor.
When you return to the lab, you have to select photos that are sent to Professor Oak. You can only select one photo per Pokemon species, so you want to pick your best one. He'll then give you points based on the size of the Pokemon and its pose. You want to have as much of the Pokemon in frame as possible and have them be facing forward. If you score too low on one of these categories, the grading will just stop right there. I told you he was pretentious. If you actually meet his standards, though, he can double the points if your Pokemon is perfectly in the center of the picture, and you get bonus points for having more than one of the same type of Pokemon in frame. Some Pokemon actions are even worth bonus points on their own, like Magmar using an attack, Electrode exploding, Pidgey using Gust, Magikarp splashing for some reason, and Jigglypuff singing. Once you're done, your highest scoring photo is saved to Oak's report, and you can pick a new course. But if you don't care about that and just want to take photos you like, you can save your favorites to this album that can be viewed at any time. And back in the 90s, many video video stores like Blockbuster would actually have these giant stations where you can bring in your game cartridge and use it to print copies of the photos you took in-game, which is honestly really cool.
As surprisingly fun as this game is, though, it sadly does not have that much content to it.
There's only 7 courses in the whole game, and they all take about 5 to 10 minutes to get through. Progressing through the main story isn't entirely linear, though, since there are certain things you have to do in order to unlock specific courses. The first one you do is the beach. The only things really of note here are a Lapras out in the distance and a Snorlax that can only be identified if you wake it up with a Pester Ball. Next is the tunnel, which is home to an abandoned power plant, so it's filled with electric types. Here we get our first example of the game being non-linear, as to unlock the next area, you have to hit this electrode with an apple, causing it to explode and open up some rubble. This lets us access the volcano, which I guarantee is only here so we have an area with fire types. And this level is filled with all kinds of secrets, like releasing these Growlithe and Arcanine from small volcano holes, having Magmar attack each other, knocking a Charmeleon into lava, causing it to evolve into Charizard, and even hitting an egg into lava, which causes Moltres to hatch, which isn't hugely exciting though, since you need to do this in order to progress. Then there's the river, which has a bunch of water types and Pokemon hiding in greenery. Oak gives you the Pester Balls, and now you have to use them to scare this hiding Porygon, which opens up the next area. This one is the cave, which has the potential for the highest possible score in the game. By hitting these coughing with apples, you can release the Jigglypuff they're holding, and at the end of the level, they'll appear on this little stage area singing, which can net you a bunch of points if you nab all 3. Something I was never able to do, since the last one is ridiculous. We also have Ditto poorly disguising themselves as Bulbasaur, so you have to pester them. In order to unlock the next stage, you need to register 40 different Pokemon in the report. Once you do, you can reach the valley, which has most of the remaining water types and some of the coolest secrets in the game. Like here, by knocking these Geodude off a cliff, you'll expose a Sandshrew from the ground, and on this one, if you knock both of them down, you'll cause a Graveler to fall and expose a Sandslash. Luckily, despite this game's short length, it has quite a lot of replay value, and not just for trying to go for a high score and unlock new areas. There are tons of cool secrets to discover. The real fun part of this game is trying to figure out all the different ways you can interact with the Pokemon and seeing all of the hidden variations in Pokemon you can find. Moltres isn't the only legendary bird. You can also find Zapdos in the tunnel by playing the Pokeflute near this Pikachu, which causes it to use Thunderbolt on this egg. Zapdos then hatches and lights up the tunnel by repowering the machinery. And in the cave, you can use the Pokeflute to make these Jinx dance that will awaken Articuno. But aside from that, there's stuff like the Charizard and Porygon I mentioned earlier. Magnemite can only be photographed if you hit them with apples. There's a Chansey rolling around, a Vileplume you have to awaken. If you throw a bunch of Pester Balls into this whirlpool, you'll find a Dragonite. Saving this Pikachu from a Zubat causes it to ride some balloons, which are worth a lot of points. And my personal favorite, if you hit this Magikarp in the valley with an apple, it'll flop up on land where it's launched by a Mankey to this part later in the level. Hit it with a Pester Ball and it'll flop into the waterfall, which causes it to evolve into Gyarados.
But those of you with counting can probably figure out that I only named 6 courses.
That's because in order to unlock the final one, you essentially have to play the entire game again. In the valley stage, you can hit a Squirtle with a Pester Ball to launch it upward and knock a Mankey off a peak. Then hit the Mankey onto a button to open up this path where Professor Oak will tell you about Pokemon signs. Signs are objects hidden around the island that resemble Pokemon in some way. There's one in each area, and you have to take pictures of all of them to show them to Oak. Thankfully, he gives you the ability to speed up the car's movement, so if you miss one, it doesn't take long to replay the level. There's these rocks that look like a Kingler on the beach. Turning on the lights with Zapdos in the tunnel will reveal the shadow that looks like a pincer. This cloud of smoke in the volcano looks vaguely like a coughing. A tree by the river that looks like a Cubone. These weird missile-looking things in the cave may seem unimportant, but if you look at the photo, they somehow resemble Mewtwo, don't question it, and these mountains in the valley look like a Dugtrio.
And if you're mad at me for spoiling them, it literally gives you hints of what they are in-game, so I'm not really helping much more than that.
Once you find all 6, you unlock the last area, Rainbow Cloud. There's only one Pokemon here, and it's the most important one of all, Mew. Mew is in the shield, which makes it unseeable, so you have to hit it with Pester Balls. But it constantly disappears, so you need to time it just right. Eventually, it'll launch the shield away, but it constantly makes new ones, so you gotta be ready. Once you finally get it, you show it to Oak. Mew will always be facing away from you, so it's impossible to get a lot of points for the pose, but it inherently is worth a huge amount of points, so you'll get a decent score as long as it's not too far away. Not sure why the legendary birds don't have this bonus, but whatever. And with all areas explored, Professor Oak bids farewell to Todd, and the credits roll.
Snap is surprisingly a lot of fun, but it's definitely lacking in content. It only takes about 2 to 3 hours to go through the whole game, but it is on the Switch Online expansion pack, and physical copies only go for about $20. So if you're curious, I'd say check it out, but if you want something with more meat on its bones, just skip right to the sequel. For me, though, it has re-inspired a love for photography, so from this point on, I am dedicating my life to becoming a nature photographer. Alright, I've been watching these squirrels for 3 hours and all they've done is go at it. I'm pretty sure I get arrested for taking photos of this.